Good afternoon, folks. Sean Chang, the Senior Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the National Health Council. Appreciate the invitation here. So the NHC represents a little over 180 national health organizations, including patient and caregiver organizations representing people living with chronic diseases, rare conditions, genetic disorders, and disabilities, groups that often generate early scientific evidence, such as natural history information that Mira was referring to, as well as real-world patient experiences. Our members also include research and provider organizations that generate clinical evidence and care for people with rare diseases, as well as biopharmaceutical device, diagnostic, and digital health companies that are committed to developing therapies and tools for these communities. Because of this broad membership, the NHC sees the full arc of what it takes for a rare disease therapy to move from concept to approval. And across that entire arc, from natural history work to trial design to regulatory review, one theme consistently emerges, which is FDA's ability to evaluate rare disease therapies depends heavily on staffing and infrastructure supported through PDUFA. And I think what you've been hearing is that PDUFA is foundational to how therapies are reviewed today, but there are also some pretty clear limits on what it can support. So understanding what those limits are is essential as we look forward to PDUFA 8. Carter grounded us all in what PDUFA is, why it's important, but I wanted to touch base a little bit on the clear statutory limits of PDUFA. So user fees can support review activities, so that's evaluating applications, meeting performance goals. What it cannot do is be used to build new scientific standards, develop methodological guidance, or create the tools that modern rare disease trials increasingly rely on. So this distinction is quite important. So PDUFA ensures that FDA can review what is submitted, but what it cannot do is ensure that the right tools exist in the first place. So that brings us to the next slide, which are some modernization priorities that the NHC has moving into PDUFA 8. Now, this is not in contrast to the priorities that you've heard from Annie or Miro. This is additive. Transparency is something that we've heard consistently and the NHC fully supports. But I wanted to touch base a little bit on some different aspects in terms of what the NHC sees as some priorities. So digital health technologies, which includes wearables, sensors, mobile apps, at-home monitors, the tools that collect continuous health information outside of clinic visits. So to use these in regulatory decisions, FDA needs standards for these for validation, reliability, context of use, as well as, so just to ground those terms a little bit, so validation, does the tool measure what it intends to measure? Reliability, does it measure it consistently? And the context of use is what regulatory purpose the measure is acceptable for. Real-world data, real-world evidence refers to the health information that's collected outside of clinical trials. So electronic health records, insurance claims, patient registry, caregiver reports, digital tools, and real-world evidence is the clinical evidence generated from analyzing those data. So that evidence is essential when rare diseases cannot support large randomized trials. Externally controlled trials, ECTs, these are trials where instead of a randomized control group, the comparison group comes from either natural history studies, which is systematic data on disease progression without treatment, historical trial data, or real-world data sets. So what FDA needs for that, for these priorities is acceptance criteria for when an external control is reliable, matching methods, which are statistical techniques that align treated and comparison groups, and sensitivity analyses, which are tests showing results held under different assumptions. And lastly, something that the NHC has been championing for some time are patient-centered core outcome sets, which are standardized sets of outcomes and endpoints that all trials in a particular disease should collect because they reflect what patients and caregivers say matter most. So those build on clinical outcome assessments, which are the tools that measure symptoms or functioning, Those are patient-reported or clinician-reported, caregiver-observed, or performance-based endpoints, which are how those measures are used to evaluate treatment benefit in a trial. And then a related term, which is patient-centered core impact sets, which are the lists of symptoms and burdens and life impacts that patients and caregivers identify as most meaningful. So the core impact sets define lived impacts, and the core outcome sets define how those impacts are measured. So the core outcome sets translate the priorities captured into consistent and usable evidence, improving comparability across trials and ensuring that FDA, clinicians, payers, and families can interpret those results in a meaningful way. So on the previous slide, I highlighted what scientific tools rare disease programs need to succeed, which are digital endpoints, real-world evidence standards, clear criteria for externally controlled trials, patient-centered core outcome sets. But none of those modernization activities can be funded or authorized through user fees alone. So PDUFA can support review work, but it can't build the scientific standards that modern rare disease development requires. Now that authority rests with Congress, so past PDUFA cycles are a strong model for what congressional leadership can achieve, right? So we've heard about what our earlier reauthorizations did, which is strengthen FDA's rare disease expertise, improving that early scientific dialogue through those FDA developer meetings like pre-INDs, Type B milestone meetings, and Type C scientific meetings, as well as establishing the PFDD framework, as well as laying the groundwork for today's digital, as well as RWE tools through pilots and infrastructure. So those congressional actions helped build the rare disease review system that we depend on today. So just as prior PDUFA cycles created the last generation of rare disease infrastructure, PDUFA 8 is a moment for Congress to enable the next one. So I think, Annie, you said, I wanted to write it down, but I missed it. So you said something about it was a moment that turned into a movement. And so that's what we're looking at now. So rare disease science is advancing rapidly. And I think at this point, patient and caregiver priorities are relatively well understood. But what's not kept pace is the regulatory infrastructure that Congress now has an opportunity to ensure that the rare disease development are fully supported and that families benefit from that innovation without unnecessary delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.